Games, board games. We might be talking about board games, but we're not gonna shout. Here we are for a bit of a chatting, and here's Matilda, who lives in Sweden, and Matilda also made some games, handcrafting, and there's a bunch of names with these things from the ancient world. And this is something that can be twirled around your head if you like twirling games around your head. But I don't know why you do that. That's a weird thing to do. I said board games, it's what we're talking about. Matilda Stevenson from Milda Matilda, and I'm not going to shout. Hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, good whatever it is, wherever you are. 10 a.m. ish UK time for Busy Beats and Board Game Blether. And I am here with Matilda Stevenson. Simonson, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
No worries.
Yeah, it's been a little bit rushed with the starting, but we are live, and it's a pleasure to have you. How are you today?
I'm fine. Thank you very much. Today is election day in Sweden, and right after this, I'm gonna go and vote.
Okay, wow. And can I should have done this before we started, but I assume your preferred pronoun is she, but you're also comfortable with the third person gender neutral they when
Sure.
applied to whoever.
Sure. Yeah, but prefer like just she.
Yes, same. And I think that let's talk about what you've been up to of late. How have the last couple of days been for you? Recent highlights, living life and seeing the sights. Recent highlights, playing games and other delights. What's been the last game you played?
Last game I played was like last weekend. I actually was like with a couple of friends. We had a sort of really big board game weekend. Actually, we just played a bunch of games the whole weekend. And I think the last game we played there was, I think it was Seven Wonders. Yeah, Seven Wonders.
Okay, classic Seven Wonders.
Yeah. I think it was my third playing, and I did horribly.
I mean, sometimes that's the joy of a game. Like, it is a safe space to do as horribly, because it's not like life. You're not going to kill anyone if you do horribly. There's no massive repercussions. And hello, Elaine. It is lovely to see you. I hope you're generally well. And I would like to always ask my guests to talk about a brilliant thing, but while you're thinking of that, yesterday I had a few friends over. We were playing through a bunch of the LDEC games. I was hoping we'd get to play through all 10 of them, but we only got to play 5. It was really interesting hearing fresh opinions and trying a bunch of things, and I'm really impressed at all the creativity that people have been bringing in. Afterwards, went to the pub, had some impromptu singing, which was lovely, and yeah, getting to know people, chatting away. But as I asked a minute ago, what do you, Matilda, believe is an potentially underappreciated brilliant thing? What's a little thing which is brilliant?
Something like underappreciated?
Sure. Sewing? Underwear?
Yeah. I think sewing is pretty underappreciated, although everyone does wear clothes, so maybe it's like not actually underappreciated. Everyone just sort of takes it for granted.
I mean, isn't taking it for granted the same as being underappreciated?
I suppose so, yeah.
And Elaine asks, what did you sing? It was just, we were trying to create a disharmony, but it's surprisingly hard to create a cacophony because naturally you want to harmonize with everyone. So that was an interesting, very short experiment. So at this point, as a new guest, I would like to subject you to the questionably quick questions, which is, Questionably quick questions is the next section. It's not an interrogation, it's just the questionably quick questions section. So, Matilda, what is in your belly right now? What is the last thing that you've eaten?
That was probably breakfast. I had some. I have no idea what it's called in English, but it's like sort of hard bread. It's a knäckebröd for all the Swedes out there. And I had that with like some with cheese and like onions and tomatoes. So that was pretty lovely.
Oh, and so when you say hard bread, is it kind of like crunchy like a biscuit?
Yes, I guess, but it's like, but it's. I'm going to actually like Google and see if Google has like anything to say about what actually is it in like English.
And
Let's.
Elaine wants to say to us that singing is a brilliant thing, not for anyone else or for performance, just singing your heart out. I love that sentiment.
It's called crisp bread in English, and apparently.
Okay. Yeah, like crackers, like kind of thin. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, but they're like pretty like they're pretty fibrous-y, and generally they're sort of like pancake or pizza sized generally. So
Oh, wow.
yeah,
That
and they have
sounds
like a
cool.
hole in the middle. So they're like originally they're made to be stored on like a sort of wooden stick that you hang in the ceiling, but no one has those anymore. They just keep the hole in it for tradition's sake.
That sounds awesome, and so that is the kind of thing that might often fill a Matilda. And so my question is, what's recently fulfilled a Matilda? So what's something that you've enjoyed, one of your happiest moments, would you say? Something that you feel proud of?
Hmm. I mean, I think that's got to be the success of Turncoats.
Mm-mm-mm.
It's been pretty crazy, honestly, to have the whole thing sort of just happen, I guess, and just have. I'm at this point. I'm approaching like almost 500 orders for Turncoats, so that is pretty insane.
Given that they're all handcrafted, that must be an immense amount of labor.
Yeah, it's a bunch, but like as I've sort of been working on the game, I've sort of become like more and more not automated. I still make each copy myself, but still I've become more efficient at making them. I've had
Mm-mm-mm.
different steps of the operation that have been made more efficient, and the most recent step that I'm working on right now is I'm trying to make the sort of get an actual printing company to make the rule books for me and order like 1,000 of those at the same time. So instead of like having to print them at my university and then cut them up and fold them myself, I can just receive them.
Wow. Yeah, and I heard that with the earliest copies, all of the pattern was being hand stitched on, but
Yeah,
recently you've
yeah,
now started
yeah,
printing that.
yeah. The original copies had the pattern on the board. Has like it was. Yeah, you can see it there. It's actually stitched on with like my sewing machine, but it takes a while to do that.
Mm-mm-mm.
And now I have a company called Spoonflower that they just send me like copy massive rolls of fabric with just the pattern of the board printed on. So
I mean, I think that being mindful of your own labor and sure, for the first 10 or 20 or even 100, it might be exciting to do all these things
yeah,
again. But then once it gets to the 200, 300 mark, I
yeah,
think that sometimes it can be like, oh, yet again, I need to do this.
yeah,
And I think yeah, even like the notion of I do a little drawing on each of the envelopes that I send out. And
mm,
yeah, Lane asks, they send you rolls of materials, so you still have to cut them out, as in cut out the things
yeah,
and.
yeah. And I washed them, and so I'll actually have them like nearby because I'm working right now. But I get them like this is still like kind of cut. I'm gonna back so the whole thing can be seen like so. So this is what they look like once I have cut this one like from the roll, and it's been washed, and it's still like, so I need to cut the edges of the thing and then stitch it and then put on the eyelets, and then it's done.
Mm-mm-mm. Now let's ask something a little bit sillier. If I were to want to cover you entirely in gold, would you pay for that service?
No.
How much would I have to pay you to cover you entirely in gold?
Is it molten gold? Because I think that would just murder me, and that's if you want to murder me, that's gonna be expensive.
I mean, I was thinking like there would be a little breathing hole, so apparently if you have a
Oh,
little
so it's
space
like,
on the back.
or
So
are you thinking like El Hombre Dorado, where you cover me in like gold dust and then I sacrificially throw stuff in a big lake, or is that?
I was just thinking that now you get to walk around for a day until your next shower. Sure, in the shower it will be kind of probably making the bath a bit dirty, but you'll be able to walk around and say, hey, I'm a golden person, check me out. Okay, let's move on and ask, if I want to build you up, if I want to give you compliments, what's the best compliment you've ever gotten?
Oh, I have no idea actually. That's a difficult one, and I'm really bad at receiving compliments, so I'm gonna just pass on that one.
And don't worry, I am not going to murder anyone. I mean, talking about murder, what is your worst fear? What would be the worst way to die?
Oh, that's a pretty easy one. On the other hand, it would probably be like a jellyfish. That would be absolutely horrible.
Jellyfish, can they actually kill you? I thought they could just put you into absolute pain and...
Yeah, it sounds horrible.
Okay.
There's probably some fucked up shit in the ocean that could kill. Am I allowed to curse, or do we have to?
I prefer not, but it's all good.
There's probably some really weird, like super jellyfish in the ocean that could absolutely murder me.
And conversely, what's your favorite way to relax?
I don't know, probably just unplug my brain and watch stupid stuff on YouTube. And I also usually make turncoats while I'm doing that, and it's pretty relaxing.
Yeah, I totally get that. Kind of when I'm drawing things or like just going through the not when I'm doing art for games, but when I'm doing the drawings for the envelopes, that's normally when I'm watching something that I can just put half an eye to. Do you have particular cartoons or particular shows that you like to watch? Tom Scott?
I have watched a bit of Tom Scott, but I gotta shout out Jacob Geller. I think he makes like absolutely amazing videos. It's like that man is like absolutely terrified of everything, and he can't like stop himself from sharing how terrifying everything is with the rest of the world. He also really likes architecture, and like, yeah, he's really fun to watch.
I think this is really important. Someone who does have something new to say, and so I will definitely be checking out Jacob Geller. If you have, presumably you do some LARP, presumably you have some fancy clothes. What is your fanciest outfit? Potentially with lots of frills.
I don't actually have anything that's like with frills, although it would be a bunch of fun. I don't know. I haven't. All my fancy clothes were like don't really fit my, I don't know, gender, I guess. So that's something I need to like fix in the future.
Okay, and I would like you to spill. What is your biggest secret that you're willing to share right now?
My biggest secret that I'm willing to share right now.
It doesn't have to be a very big secret.
No, the most adrenaline I've ever felt in like my life. That was when the first time when I pulled out another human's tooth.
Oh wow! And is it as exciting and viscerally emotional every time since then?
No, I have done it like a few more times since then, and it doesn't hit the same anymore. And for anyone who's like actually freaking out right now, I should clarify that I'm studying dentistry. I'm on my last year right now, so hopefully this time in a year, I'll be a dentist.
Congratulations! And yeah, just for the record, you are a student. I guess you are still in your formative years of moving towards your chosen career path, which is dentistry.
Yeah, and my plan is to like board game design as like a hobby.
That's really awesome. I think that there's a lot of people who do board game design as you do as a hobby, and marketing is such a big part of that. And
Mhm.
I know that shilling is an uncomfortable word, but what would you say is the best form of marketing you've managed to do?
Sending a copy to SpaceBit, or just selling a copy to Dan Thoreau. That was his review was like a complete breakthrough for like the sales of Turncoats and all of that stuff.
So you ascribe, it sounds like for you it was coming in tiny dribs and drabs and wasn't
Yeah,
seeing
yeah,
much.
yeah. Before Dan Thoreau, I think I had about 2 dozen handmade sales and maybe like another 2 dozen of the sort of no, maybe even less, maybe like just a few of the sort of the printed sales. And then when I got his he posted his review, I got 200 orders the first day,
Wow.
and I'm pretty sure I'm still like writing off like whatever he like the review that he posted, and now I'm also almost approaching 500 orders. So yeah,
I mean, that is just such a astounding number for an independent creator like ourselves.
yeah, yeah.
And but then it
I
was an
certainly have.
amazing review where Dan
I
did say it was the best game that they'd played that year. So
so far at least.
mhm.
But yeah, it's been crazy.
And the final question, I mean, that I would like to ask, what is the most difficult question that you feel you could be asked?
I don't know. But probably, I have like a pharma. I have like an exam in pharmaceutics in like 2 weeks, so it will probably be something from that because I have not studied properly for it quite yet. I was like,
So
oh,
if I look up an
what is the
obscure
interaction?
term,
Oh, what is the you come in? You have a patient who's been like drinking grapefruit juice constantly his entire life, and you need to seriously sedate him because he also has like severe fear of dentistry. What do you need to do, for example? That's an easy one because I actually know it. But
hmm,
uh, like for some reason, or I know the reason, but grapefruit use in like severely like interacts and sort of prevents stuff like narcotics from like working, or like not prevents, but it gets weird because grapefruit grapefruit use not even once.
yeah, I noticed that I can't remember where it was, but he said don't have any grapefruits, and I was
Mm.
oh wow, I'm glad that I read that because I do really like grapefruits. I mean, I don't have them that often, but for me they are a little treat, especially pink or red grapefruits, and they're kind of citrusy but not overly harsh, and so there's a really nice flavor. Um, and Elaine wants to tell you the surprise that we're actually just here to test you on the dental exam questions.
Oh geez, oh no, oh no.
So, as always, everyone in the chat, feel free to comment, ask questions, fun like follow, all the regular stuff. But yeah, what I thought is today we'll just kind of chat about a bit about your life, as it said in the description that hopefully you had a wee read of, and yeah, how you got into games and all sorts of other things. So let's start from the start. What's the first memory that you're willing to share?
About like board games and stuff, or
I actually meant just the first memory that you're willing to share.
oh,
So,
I don't know. It's just some random memories of running around in the old apartment, or like I actually do remember the first time I read something. I think it was like 4 years old, and was like, oh, I had listen. I know this book inside and out, so I know what the text says. Okay, now I know what the word says, and I just read it. I guess I don't know.
wow. So,
Or
were you an avid reader as a child, would you say?
yeah, yeah, I was.
And did you have many siblings and people in
Mm,
the house with you?
I had a younger sister, uh, and then I also had like a bit later. I also got a. She's like 2 years younger than me, and then I have another brother who's like 11 years younger than me. So he's like I I was going to say he's like a little baby, but he's actually like a grumpy teenager.
That's totally fair. And yeah, I hope that both of your siblings are both alive and well and healthy and enjoying life. Um, did you play a lot of board games as a child? Yeah, what was your first
um,
memory of board games?
yeah, I think I played a lot of board games. Like not like we didn't obviously play like ooh cool designer board game and weird indie stuff. Weird like cool games from like his. No, it was like Risk and Catan and Monopoly and all of that stuff. So
I mean, Catan's a lot more modern than anything that I played until I was, I think, after university.
mm,
So I think that as a family game growing up, if Catan is your family game, that's both an indication of that your family was kind of tapped in, I assume, to modern board gaming, but also
at, that,
testament to the advertising power of
at that
Asmodee
point,
recently.
when I got to it, I think Catan was pretty mainstream actually. And like my parents were, they're not really into board games, but they have been playing like bridge with like their entire. They pretty much met each other like through playing bridge. So there's a long-standing history of gaming in the family. I just didn't care for bridge.
Why not? Is it the inaccessibility of the weird clues that you give each other and this language? It's almost nonsensical language that you need to learn. Is that your issue with it? Because that's my issue with it.
I think it's a bit of that, but it's also like I would rather play. I think I would rather play 100 games once rather than playing one game 100 times. At this point, I'm pretty sure I've played Turncoats like 100 times, but that doesn't really count, doesn't?
Yeah, you always end up playing your own games a lot more.
Yeah,
And I guess a lot of, I assume you're not just talking about the playtesting, but you're talking about since it was finished,
yeah,
like
yeah.
as part of conventions and markets and whatnot.
Yeah, it's been. I think it's been finished for like a year now. So
And over that year, you've played hundreds of games. Is that
at least 100. The development for Turncoats was actually super fast, but we can get to that like some other. I think we had to stick to the schedule and talk about the development at some other point.
sure? Um, so what are some of your other passions? I mean, let clearly you are massively in love with board games, and I saw that you've got, just for clarity, on your website, if I bring up the link, you've got this fairly bare bones website where people can click here to learn
Mm.
about Turncoats, and presumably this other ancient games used
Yeah,
to be a working link until you decided, I'm just guessing, that you didn't want to hand make them anymore. You wanted to focus on
uh,
Turncoats.
I actually still I should fix that. I didn't know the link was broken because I actually have those games like set up for printing.
Oh, I assumed that it was intentionally not working.
I I should get to fixing that. Uh, so like
Well,
here I actually had a so here's like the game that's on the it's printed and it has like a mill game on the back and a game of on the front. So I should get to fixing that actually.
so yeah, what brought you to ancient games? As Elaine says, I mean, I think I kind of take it for granted that you do have an interest in ancient games,
Yeah.
but why? What's the draw?
I think it's because I like LARPing. Honestly, the sort of medieval. I do a lot of like medieval fantasy. Or I used to do. I haven't done in a while because the world ended when no one was watching. But yeah, like do a lot of LARPing. So you sort of look into what. Okay, I like to play games. I want to play games at the LARP. What games can I sort of bring to a LARP? So, and I also think a lot of these ancient games have like really cool mechanics that are sort of underutilized uh, in the modern design space. I, for example, think that roll and move has a lot of merit, but it's underutilized because it was used very badly in a lot of games that
Hmm.
came out in the last century.
Yes, I would agree with that because I mean, backgammon is such an amazing game.
Yeah,
And simply by giving you two dice to choose from and giving you a multitude of pieces to move, that opens up the decision
yeah,
space massively,
yeah,
but still brings in a frisson of excitement of drama brought upon by the dice. Um, but it felt like you are focusing on the two-player abstracts.
yeah,
Um, given
and
the content, oh sorry,
yeah,
go
and
ahead.
actually a big part of like why does turncoats exist? It's actually because like all of these ancient abstracts are for two players,
Mm-mm.
and I get I sort of get why, but I wanted something that was more tailored for the 3 to 5 player experience, but still sort of used all the pieces in every single game, and for that to sort of shared control, the 3 factions clashing mechanics were very well suited because you use all of the pieces in every single game, regardless of how many players you are.
And it's interesting. So you were there inspired by presumably what you wanted to play in LARPs with this historical setting. I
Mm.
assume that within a LARP, there's a lot of times when you don't want to play with just two players, you want to play with more
Yeah,
players.
exactly.
And then
You
you
want to involve everyone around you. You need like simple, fast game with simple rules for that to really work out.
and there is something lovely about the tactile quality when I see photos of your games where they are, to quote Dan, like you want to touch it and you want to kind of see it and feel the fabric. It's not just like a printed bit of cardboard where, sure, that's got a nice feel, but especially when in modern games it's got a bit of paper pasted on top of the board, it's
Hmm.
all glossed up to heck and it's all incredibly uniform. You don't even get something as interesting as just a bit of grey board, which has its own kind of chaos. And I
Hmm.
think that that chaotic, stochastic nature of materials is something that you do still get in the felt or whatever you're
Yeah.
using.
Right now I'm using like a fleece material. I'm obviously limited to like what they have on the Spoonflower website. Previously I've used some sort of like linen cotton hybrid, but the felt material has the advantage of that it doesn't crease, even if you make the game spend like a month or two or more as a bag. The fabric doesn't crease and it lays flat when you pull it out. And I think that is a it's obviously not usable in like a sort of LARP environment in a but in a situation where materials matter from like a sort of, I don't know, a sort of historical perspective. But I think
Mm-mm.
that when you don't care for like, oh, it has to be material like made of linen or else it stands out like a sore thumb, then I think the felt is or the fleece is probably the best material to make like a bag game out of because it doesn't grease.
Yeah, that's super important to think about what qualities it needs. And um, I've never gone through that, but that's something that we'll talk about, as you said, more in just a couple of days. You've talked about with Biff how the game is vaguely based on Sweden's own history,
Yeah.
and you are working on, I believe you said, a sort of prequel to Turncoats.
Yeah, or at least a game that sort of takes place before. Uh, Turncoats is kind of vague historically. It roughly takes place from like 12th to 13th century and ending in at least the game ends in 1251 when a man called Birger Jarl, who sort of is the winner of the Turncoats game, sort of he murders his entire political opposition, and in the 10 in the 10-year peace that followed, he basically builds up the nation state and gives it muscles, and that's also something I want to cover with the game.
Mm-mm.
Uh, but first, I'm gonna start with the prequel. So then I will have like a whole little trilogy about early Swedish medieval history.
And so is your motivation at this point, because it started off with having a game that you could play in LARP for your own purposes, is your motivation now to bring more of Sweden's history to an international audience, to share that with the wider world?
I think there's a mix of both. Uh, Pax Penning is also still going to follow the sort of general aesthetic of Turncoats, while still having a bit more complicated mechanics and pieces and stuff like that. And then the Birger Jarl game is going to be it. Something I've given myself permission to do is because something that he does is he also brings in the monks, for example. And suddenly we start to get like written history, like primary sources about written history, and now we can have cards in the game. So that's sort of so when people start writing things down, I'm also going to allow myself to have cards with text on them because that's a pretty big important thing for me. I'm not allowing the first two games are not allowed to have cards with text
Mm-mm.
because there weren't any. There's no good written sources.
You want the games to feel like almost artifacts from that era.
Yeah, although Pax Penning will probably be too complicated to really pass as a ancient relic. We'll see. It's still in development, but it's looking to be a bit complex.
And how do games fit into your life? I mean, you say that you're someone who craves novelty. How often do you actually get to play games that aren't yours? Do you have regular
Uh,
game groups? How big a part
yeah,
of your life are they?
they're a pretty big part. I have like at least one game group that's sort of that I mentioned the last. I met them like the last weekend, and we did the whole thing there. And then I also have all of my old friends from high school, and we still hang out and we play a lot of board games. Now it's more like it's a rare occurrence because a lot of them have moved to like different parts of Sweden, so it's kind of limited to whenever everyone's back in the capital where I live. But it's
Mm.
still fun. It's a pretty major part of my life, and I spend more time playing other people's games than do playing my own.
I mean, that's a healthy way to be. I know that not every designer feels the same way, but it feels a shame when you're out of touch of what else is going on. It's hopefully going to keep your games fresh and meaningful and relevant for a long time to come. Um, Presumably, all those friends that you grew up with, that you play board games with whenever they're around, are very encouraging. Have they all played Turncoats? Are they playtesters of your forthcoming
They have
games?
all played Turncoats, and I think a lot of them have also played Pax Penning's various iterations. And so yeah, they whenever I can coax them into playtesting, or just I want to play this like weird game about empires and blah blah blah. So yeah, it's fun.
There's a question about pack spending and the games you do, whether
Mm.
you have to do lots of research, or is the history something that you already knew, being born and growing up in Sweden?
No, I did history. I did a bunch of research for Turncoats. I did like less research. It was uh, generally sort of how the different like political relationships sort of worked out with each other during like the early time periods. But it was not a ton of research. There are no like clear historical figures like that sort of emerged during this time period. It's mostly just noble families like
Mm-mm.
screwing around and finding out, and occasionally murdering each other and occasionally marrying into each other and being generally not going anywhere, which is also sort of why Birger Jarl matters, because he breaks the cycle and sort of becomes like creates a nation state with like actual power for once. For Turncoat for Pax Penning, I did a lot more research, and research has generally been also a lot harder because all the sources from the time period suck for one reason or another. There's like all of our primary written sources, written like by people from the time period, are the runestones, and runestones are generally just sort of, oh, my father went to Greece and died. May God save his soul. And then they say, oh, Epir carved these runes, or something like that. They all say pretty much the same thing. And
So it's kind of just like a tombstone on a graveyard in
yeah,
modern eras.
and I think it's also something important to sort of point out is how Christian a lot of them are. They're covered in crosses. You might see runestones and think like, oh, this is like a Viking manly man thing, Odin, blah blah blah. There are some runestones like that, but the vast majority of runestones were raised by Christian during this sort of transition period between the Viking Age and the medieval age, and during the Christianization of Sweden. And that's something I also want to bring up in Pax Penning, the sort of religious affiliation of the people who raised runestones.
And do you believe that it is incumbent upon us to study history, to learn from the past, so that we can avoid mistakes? Do you think that history is something that should be read up on by everyone?
I think it's important to study history, but maybe not so much to like, we gotta ignore the like learn from history so we avoid the mistakes of the past. But like, I also think that a lot of as history changes, a lot of societies, the challenges that society faces change. So maybe not like we're not going to learn how to handle global warming from the 15th century.
Mm.
That's simply not the case. Like each era of time faces its own challenges and political climate. So in that fashion, I don't think it's useful, really useful to study history that much. But instead, I'm more worried about like, at least for me, because I do a lot of studying Swedish history and general Scandinavian history, and specifically like around the Viking Age, and that has a tendency to get adopted by some nasty people, like co-opted. And I think it's important to sort of keep straight what's sort of true about this time period and
Well,
about these people.
I don't know. I genuinely don't know what you are talking about. I feel like the way
Uh,
you're alluding to it, I should know, but
it it generally has like stuff like Viking runes and sort of the the image of the Viking on the whole, it has a tendency to get co-opted, like used by uh, like people on the far alt right, so that sort of thing.
Really?
Yeah, it's a really popular thing,
Oh,
and we're
I
talking
feel
like
like I'm sorry. I feel
Germany
like
in the 1940s kind of thing.
okay.
Yeah, that was like a pretty big deal. So I think it's important to sort of keep the facts sort of straight about this, and sort of also sort of generally deconstruct the idea of the Viking, for example. That's also something I really want to make a game about, because the way a lot of people think of the Viking, like, oh, everyone knows that, oh, the helmet with the horns, that's not a real thing. Everyone knows that, but
Mhm.
it goes more to that. Like the image that a lot of people have of the Viking was made up by like white nationalists in the 19th century. You were trying to cope with the fact that Sweden kind of sucked at the time.
Mm. Oh
So
wow.
that's so like the whole, oh, muscle bound, big guy with no shirt. Like, ooh, no, that's just not a real historical figure. That's actually why Pax Viking is like one of my favorite games about the Viking Age, because it actually I feel like it gets the Viking Age more than anything, any other game that or hell, more than most pieces of media that I've encountered.
That's really interesting. I mean, I was aware that the horns weren't a real thing. Do you think that games which play into that cartoon stereotypes, like Vikings Gone Wild, I don't. There's a million other games I could talk about, but
Yeah,
games that are clearly light-hearted, if you know what I mean.
yeah,
Do you think that they are harmful in perpetuating that stereotype?
I guess. I also think it feels really weird to say it, because to talk about like cultural appropriation, because I'm very white and white people are really good at cultural appropriation. But I feel like
Mm-mm.
that's generally what has happened with the Viking. That people are using the image of like my ancestors in a way that is not correct at all, and is used for something that I don't approve of at all. And I think that it's so. I think that sort of I think, for example, that games like Blood Rage or Tiny Epic Vikings pull off a bit of cultural appropriation and kind of get away with it because they have white people, which it's obviously it's obviously like worse with when you do like lazy games about Egyptian culture or like Aztec culture or whatever, like a lot of culture like that. But I do still think it's my culture, and it's my ancestors and all that stuff, and yeah,
It's interesting because I don't want to say there's an exact analog, but you could draw parallels between that and Disney Pirates, if you know what I mean. Because there's this kind of sense of Pirates of the Caribbean or
yeah,
Captain Hook or whatever, who's this kind of gallant pirate that never really existed. And
yeah,
ancient pirates are a lot more similar to real world pirates, where they're basically just people who go up and shoot people and take their stuff. It's
yeah.
not really that romantic or whatever.
No.
And
And and
it,
I also want to bring up that in this, like a lot of the Vikings probably weren't like very violent. Like sure, the archetypical image of the Viking is like, oh, they're running up and they're sacking villages and whatnot. But like a lot of the Vikings were traders. Like the archetype, like especially those like from Sweden who traveled into like the east and more down the rivers of Eastern Europe. They were more traders than they were raiders. And sort of part of the Viking is that, first of all, we don't really know what they were like back at home. It's very difficult to sort of glean from the very bad sources we have. So we just have other people writing about Vikings. And okay, a bunch of peaceful Vikings pass through the village, they trade, blah blah blah. No one cares. Uh, it's not gonna get written down. But then a bunch of Vikings show up and just absolutely wreak havoc, and those people get written down because that's a big deal. Oh, a bunch of like Northerners showed up in boats and raided the church. That's a big no-no. So
Mm.
those get written down, and that's the sort of image that survives. So in this case, it's not really history getting written by the winners, but instead by very sore losers.
And it's interesting that the things that get written down are going to be the outlandish things, right? Because if I were to talk about a time that I went to, let's say I talk about a trip to the shop, I'm not going to talk about the normal things that I saw, or I'm going to say, oh, this time I passed by these people who were all singing. And because that's something that I only saw one day in like the entire year. And then people read that potentially in thousands of years and then think that that's a normal thing, which the only reason it was ever written down is because it's so abnormal. And it's really interesting. I just to talk about myself for a moment. I made a game. It's an abstract game about making shapes, and then once you've made your shapes, you collect those shapes. And I was thinking, oh, if it's abstract, but I could sort of theme it around runes or being a witch or something, and then ancient inscriptions. And someone said, oh, you should theme it around Vikings because it's runes. And I said, isn't that a problem? Like, don't they have real runes? And there was, oh, it's so long ago. And it doesn't matter, which, yeah, it's an interesting kind of mindset to say it's so long ago, it doesn't matter, which it is like, yeah, the whole notion of reparations and at what point, like, as you say, with cultural appropriation, you still have a lot of privilege on the global landscape being white. It's not like Sweden is an impoverished country or anything, but
No,
on the global
we're doing
landscape,
pretty well.
like something like Nigeria, like, is probably doing a lot worse. And that's something where we might actually look into, okay, how can we help bring them up? And yeah, before we leave this topic, because this feels like something that we could have talked about for the entire episode, do you have any closing thoughts about it, or any things that you want to say to those people who say, oh, it's so long ago, who cares?
It's like, yeah, I was just thinking about how I think it's important because when you say who cares, the worst person that you know is going to do whatever they want with it and use it as justification for whatever they want to do. And whether that's like whether it's like, oh, nationalists in the like 19th or 18th century, or if it's modern day like politicians talking about like, oh, blah, 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 whatever junk they're talking about. Sorry, I have a lot of like really bad politicians on my mind. I'm gonna go vote after this. So
You're going to go what's
Okay.
after?
yeah, after
Oh,
when I'm done here. So I
vote.
just have terrible politicians on my mind right now because
I'm sorry. I hope that at least one of them is a good person.
yeah, yeah, but
Okay.
this election cycle has been really weird because like for the first time the sort of nationalist party is like not being completely excluded by the other parties, so that's a bit rough. But it does make voting easier because I don't have as many options to choose from because I can just immediately exclude those who decided to
Align themselves in that way.
collaborate with the Swedish Democrats. So that's
So the Swedish Democrats are like the British National Party. Is that sort of, they are
yeah, they're
quite
sort of
national?
they're pretty. I think it's more to think of them as like in the same way as a sort of I guess the sort of make America great again crowd,
Hmm.
it's that sort of rhetoric, but not
Wow.
as it's not as inflamed, I think, because they have at least to show some pretense of like civility, but it gets sort of thinner and thinner by the day,
Hmm.
and it has sort of spilled over into the other politicians because they gained a lot of votes in like a lot of like popularity in the past few years. So the people who sort of like them are the ones who have been shown to be able to change like what party they vote for. A lot of other people are not very flexible, so the sort of the whole election cycle and whatever the politicians are talking about is sort of, I feel like it's sort of catered to the kind of people who sort of were willing to change, who changed for like this party of
Hmm.
nationalists. So that it's a bit screwy. I I don't think it would have mattered. Like I would probably still have voted for the parties that I'm planning to vote for anyway. But it's still a bit screwy. I have like a game about this whole like election, the screwy politics of parliamentary politics. What happens when you get like 7 or 6 different parties duking it out? I have a game for that, but it's kind of half baked. But I'm gonna work on
It's
it at some point.
it feels like it's important, as you say, to put things right, to make sure that the facts are known. And I want to acknowledge Elaine's comment. Oh, wait, that's not the comment. I wanted to acknowledge a previous comment. The stories of real people is often far more representative of what was really going on. And also, thank you for explaining that. I think I learned more in just the last 2 minutes about Swedish politics than I have in the last few years. I'm aware that we're getting to the end of the hour. Before I um, start wrapping up, I would like to ask you two more questions. Firstly, you brought up global warming, and of course, there are many games that are coming out. Recently, I played Daybreak, which is by Matteo Menapace and Matt Leacock, who have worked together to make a cooperative game which presupposes that all the countries are working together. So it's
Obvious and realistic.
yes, but it has to do that in or well, it takes that as a presupposition, and then you play the game, and then at the end you're like, yes, if everyone did work together, this would be an achievable issue. Like we could actually solve this issue if only we all work together. And then my personal takeaway was going home and then being incredibly depressed for a day or so. That's never probably going to happen.
Mhm.
But I'm going to have a conversation with Matteo at some point about that. But what is your opinion about games that do reflect current issues, not just history, but current issues like um, global warming? Do you think that they risk being didactic? Do you think that there is actually a worth in them? Do you think that we should keep exploring these issues through the medium of games, or is that a distraction from
No, I
actually
think
solving these issues?
no, I absolutely think you should keep exploring like issues like any like oh we can say like oh the this historical game is about like the past, but anything that is made in the present is going to also be about the present.
Mm-mm.
Uh, my so I definitely think we shouldn't like sort of. There's obviously games that some subjects that wouldn't be respectful to depict in a depict in a board game. But I do generally think that it's important to keep the hobby or to keep bringing up like serious subjects in even when they're depicted poorly. I think that in that itself sort of raises the important conversation. Like everyone loves to hate on like Puerto Slavery Simulator, Rico,
Mm.
but it's as bad as the game itself is in its portrayal. I think it has done more to cause discussions about the subject than like almost any other game. Like it was popular, it was bad, it did a thing poorly, and that created a lot of important discussions And a
But
lot of
then now, obviously, thanks to, I believe, Jason Perez, it's going to be completely redone to be something that's more palatable to Puerto Ricans.
yeah, and obviously that's good, but I also think that it part of me for me part of the whole thing was also like how sort of systemic the issues were. It wasn't just that, oh, we had the little colonizer cubes. It was like how the system itself was built up.
Hmm.
So I don't know if you can just put a fresh coat of paint over something rotten and say that it's good, but maybe I'm
Hmm.
wrong.
I mean, there's definitely, again, this is something that we could discuss for the whole hour, and I would challenge the statement that some things should not be talked about. I kind of feel like anything should be talked about
Yeah,
via a game, and to say that they shouldn't is kind of saying that games can only be a certain amount of levity. I think that's sure with the word game there is a connotation of fun, but
mm.
I think there's a strong
Oh,
argument to say.
I subscribe to Colwerley's school that games do not have to be fun. I do
Mm-mm.
not design games to be fun. You cannot do that. They might be fun on accident, but trying to design for it is folly. You cannot
Mm.
measure fun. It
I'm
is
going to disagree again because I think that Yogi, I mean, it was designed to be silly and make people laugh. And hopefully it does that. And something that is completely irrelevant and unrelated to any real world problems is also still worth having because
yeah.
smiling is sometimes worth
There
doing.
was actually like what you should and shouldn't depict. There was a game that came out a couple of years ago, and it didn't really hit. I think it was more like an art project than an actual sort of product that you bought. But it was basically a game about shoving as many people as possible into a train, and then
Oh, do you mean, yeah, by, what was that by Jane, not Jane McGonigal, Brenda Braithwaite?
I do not remember. It was like a museum object, I think.
Mm-mm.
But and didn't really, and as people played it, they sort of realized that, ooh, this, so, and it also raised a lot of question about, is this like, should we depict this sort of thing in games? I don't know, maybe, but it's. I mean, I have been thinking about making my own, like every history game designer at some point makes a game about like World War II, and I think I would like to contribute to that sort of canon at some point, I guess. But I'm not really interested at all in the war, but rather the sort of role that Sweden played, because most of my games are about like Swedish history,
Mm.
and Sweden during World War II was like, it was neutral, and being neutral, like when you're living right next to 1940s Germany, that's not really an ethical thing. And we did a lot of really bad stuff during that time period that a lot of like Swedes haven't really confronted. So I think that would be, it would kind of be self-therapeutic. I need to confront my own feelings on the subject. So it's part of, that's why I would make it, but also to sort of give a different perspective on something that you've seen a dozen times before.
Hmm. And I think that your points about neutrality actually being incredibly problematic. I mean, if we look at, I think Amabel Holland in This Guilty Land
Yeah.
really explored that strongly to show that, hey, neutrality isn't okay.
No.
When there is something that's so repugnant, you have to stand up and say, this is not okay. Like when something terrible is happening, being a bystander, sure, I understand you need to watch out for your own safety, so you aren't always able to rush in and protect other people, but that's not an okay thing to
No.
be.
Especially if not if you're also like selling iron to the like to the sort of to the neutral, like if you, oh, and letting like the German soldiers use like the Swedish rail system to transport troops to Norway. That's not really a great thing either. but they really wanted to remain neutral, and I think that's something worth exploring, like that sort of mindset. Like, it's probably going to be a sort of cooperative game about mostly trying to stay out of the war, because that was the goal of the politicians and leaders at the time. They wanted to remain neutral at all times, and I think that should be the goal in the game as well. That's something like to make the players want and fear the same thing as people wanted and feared at the time.
Mm.
So I think even as so then what do you have to do to stay neutral? Well, you gotta sell iron, you gotta do this, you gotta do that. Uh, and maybe as the sort of the war goes on outside, maybe you can get away with doing. And I also want to throw in the opportunity to also do ethical things. Like there was a lot of Jewish refugees that came to Sweden during this time period. Like before Denmark capitulated to the Germans, they like sent literally all of their Jews over to Sweden to save them from the camps, I guess. So there's a it's a very thorny game. I have not like done enough research to make it yet. I have not sorted out my own feelings about the matter. I feel like it's very easy to judge people in the past. Like,
Mm-mm-mm.
what would you have done if you were there? So I have a lot
It
lot of feelings on the subject. I don't really know how to approach it quite yet. I want to do it. I haven't gotten to it yet.
it sounds like something that will definitely take lots of work and research, but will be incredibly valuable.
Yeah.
And I look forward to hearing more about it. Um, the last question that I wanted to ask before we wrap up is, what are some other things that make you smile? I understand games aren't, as we've just established, always necessarily always fun, but assuming they sometimes make you smile, what are some other things that you enjoy? What are some of your top favorite things?
Mm, play a lot of like, or used to. Now I don't really have as much time anymore. But like a lot of video games. I'm like a Nintendo gal, so I'm into all of the Nintendo classics. So I realized that Splatoon 3 released like yesterday or something like that. I was a bit caught by surprise by that. But I want to get around to playing that at some point because I really like the Splatoon 2. Um, I also like a lot of long distance running. I think that is
Mm.
actually fun, and I think that my definition of fun is going to get very much questioned when I say that. Oh, I like running like a 10K. I think that's pretty fun, but I do enjoy it. Um, I think, and yeah, I think that's all I have in between university and making games. I
And
don't.
hopefully, the dentistry occasionally makes you smile,
Yeah,
even
yeah,
after the first time that you pulled out someone's tooth.
yeah. Dentistry is pretty fun. Although it's right now we're starting to approach like the difficult part of like the last year of university studies, and I think it's fun whenever I get to like actually work with people at the clinic, get to help people
Mm.
there. It's I Something that I really like about dentistry is that you sort of get to help some when you meet someone and they have a problem, you often get to help them like immediately.
Mm.
Sometimes some procedures obviously take like several visits to fulfill, but sometimes sometimes someone comes in and you can just straight up help them and they can leave the clinic feeling like much better. Even if even if they have like a day or two of like excruciating pain awaiting them because removing tooth ain't easy.
Yeah, I mean, it's
So
less
have you had,
painful than the fallout from that's certainly less painful than the toothache.
yeah, or so I've been told. I haven't experienced either myself quite yet.
Yes, I don't have perfect teeth, sadly.
Yeah.
Is I guess that's my best pills. But thank you so much. It has been lovely to chat. And here's the time where I turn it round and I invite you to ask me and anyone watching whatever you would like to ask us. So, as we wrap up, the question of the day, here's a little question before we go on our way. Is there anything you would like to ask us? Matilda Simonsson.
Uh, what's your favorite ancient abstract game? Do you have one?
Um, do, I mean, my favorite game is Go,
Huh?
so
Oh, Go scares me.
why
uh,
so?
because it's like because it's like so the gap between people who have played like once and 100 times and 1,000 times and 10,000 times. It's so like massive. The game scares me, to be honest. I
But then with Go, the beauty of it is in the extra stones. That if we were to play, I think that sure, we'd spend a couple of hours, playing games where it's basically just teaching games, but after a couple of hours, you could give you some extra stones and we would probably be playing on an equal playing field. Whereas with something like chess,
mm,
it's much more difficult to balance out the game. Whereas
yeah,
with Go, that's built into the culture.
yeah,
And that for me is such a beautiful part of it. Sure, I love the flow of it. I love the fact that it's about placements rather than movements. And for me, placements games which push themselves towards an end, as opposed to movements games which can more easily end in a stalemate. There's something lovely about that. And I do love the fact that you start off feeling out the board and then you've got more of an idea of how it will turn out. And then you get to the end and you make the final few moves. There's a lovely arc to the game where each part of it feels different. But the thing that actually encourages me to, not all the time, but it's something that I would come back to and it is my favorite game, is because of the handicap system, essentially, where you are easily able to give other people extra stones.
mm, maybe I should try it actually. I Yeah,
I would heartily recommend it.
yeah.
And Elaine says, backgammon. I learnt it for the first time on a school trip to see the Merry Rose, and I found it so fascinating that there was this game that the sailors would play on the ships. That I didn't actually realize that. Yeah, I guess spots. Did it come from like the Middle East? I'm not
I'm
sure
pretty
of.
I'm pretty sure it's from Middle East. It's like it's sort of
Like
like
with
yeah,
my parents, so my family is from Iran, and as a child we would like it's called Tartanard, but the Dublin Cube is a relatively modern invention, and I do believe that the Dublin Cube makes it a much stronger game. But from a pastime perspective, there is something also lovely about just playing the games through to completion as a state of okay, we're going to spend this time together. There is something lovely about having a little bit of abnegation in a game to some degree.
have you tried the game of Ur?
I I'm not sure I have. Um, there's a lot of abstract strategy games that
Yeah,
I've not played as much as I would like to.
yeah. Game of Ur is it's one of the other games that I'm selling uh selling I think it's a sort of predecessor slash replaced by backgammon. It has like a lot in common, being the sort of tactical roll and move duel where you have a ton of different pieces that you need to move around and stuff. I think what really carries it is actually the dice, because instead of having like the standard six-sided dice, you actually have four-sided dice that roll. Each dice individually rolls either a one or a zero, so you get like this sort of wonderful
Bell
bell
curve.
curve on the results of the rolls.
Hmm, interesting. So
There's
it's
like there's like
basically a bunch of D2s.
yeah, There's like a lovely video on the game on YouTube by like Steve some Earth. I can't remember his name, but
Oh, the historian from the
it's like a
British
historian from the
Museum.
British Museum. Yeah, that sort of that recreated the rules basically.
I mean, there's so many, and I think the lesson here is to check out the past, but just because it's interesting. And um, at this point, to everyone, what are you up to? Maybe you're going to vote, maybe you're taking a day off, but feel free to share any details if you want. Feel free to share. I promise that we care. Over to you. What you're up to, you can share, but only if you want to. Anything else you want to share, Matilda?
I think I think I've said a lot. I mean, there's obviously stuff to say about like how the development and
No, I
whatever.
meant about what you're up to after this.
Uh, after this, I'm going out to vote, and then I'm probably going to spend the rest of the day just making turncoats because I have a
Awesome.
lot of orders to fulfill. So I have like a big pile of fabrics that are like cut up into squares that I cut up, blah blah blah. So yeah, that's my plan.
Well, I hope you really enjoy that. I am going to try and take it easy today. Might do a little bit of tidying up and at least clean up after the guests from yesterday.
I should
Um,
also probably clean up.
and I might, if I feel like it, do a little bit of design for the abstracts game because I'm quite excited by that, and I might do a bit of watching videos or sorting myself out, maybe wash my hair, which actually takes a while because I
Yeah.
don't do it as often as I should. But yeah, I might go out tonight. We'll see how it works. So
If you
recap.
if you want like any sort of like I don't know cultural sensitivity, I read I guess on like if you wanted to use like runes in the thing that you mentioned, I could check that out. And if you send a
I
message,
appreciate that. Honestly, I think that given that I am getting people to create specific shapes and they don't have any
inherent
real
meaning.
meaning, like it feels weird to tack it onto a real world thing.
That's
Uh,
fair. You know what it does sound like? It does sound like people like looking at stars and making shapes.
It's well, you make shapes, and then when you make the shapes get removed, and then those cards that you've scored allow you to do one-time special abilities to make bigger and better shapes. And then if you make the biggest and best shape, then you win the game. But more likely, you'll just make bigger and bigger shapes until you get more points. But it's
That
also at
sounds
the points where I'm exploring what's possible within the mechanics of the game. It is very much mechanically driven, and even though I'm not sure if this is a game that I will finish up with and ever pitch to anyone or self-publish, I'm enjoying the process. And sometimes that I think that's an important thing. Like not everything has to be done with a view to this is going to be a commercial success. Sometimes the process itself can be for my own edification. I think that's a valuable thing to remember. But I very much appreciate that offer of checking into cultural sensitivity. We have talked about so much today. We've talked about Seven Wonders, about enjoying cheese together with tomatoes and hard bread and onions, about turncoats, about jellyfish, about Jacob Jeller pulling teeth, about how Dan Furo really helped you sell so many more copies, about the joys of dentistry and being able to help people the day that they come in, being an avid reader, playing Gris, Catan, Monopoly, ancient games and LARP, turncoats again, friends, research, history, global warming, about Vikings and cultural appropriation, Pax Viking being a good quality game that actually has a good amount of research into it, about Vikings being traders, and a recommendation to everyone to keep exploring issues via games or indeed any medium. That some things are disrespectful, but then there are caveats to that, and that maybe issue to talk about another time. Sweden and how neutrality can be problematic, especially when you're selling iron to, Nazis. And video games, Nintendo, like Splatoon 2, and long distance running and dentistry. It will have been a lovely chat, and
Yeah,
even though
it's been
it's
lovely.
the question of do you ever get to know someone, I feel like I've gotten to know you a little bit, and I hope that anyone watching also feels like they've gotten to know you. And thank you once more for coming on. And Elaine says we should have a game about ancient Swedish dentistry.
I don't know about how like well that would like I don't really know how they did it back then. I think it was just the local smith. Like he had the tools for the job, so he just
Hmm.
uh, if I wanted to make a game about like Swedish history of dentistry, that would probably have to be about the way that we discovered why we get cavities,
Hmm.
because it was not very ethical at all. It was a horrible like experiment that we did in the 50s, where we basically force fed like patients at a mental institute like tons and tons of sugar to find out if sugar was caused cavities. It is a absolutely horrible
Wow.
that they did, and yeah, most of modern dentistry was built on that study.
Wow.
Hmm.
Yeah, that is
That is
a
super messed.
quandary indeed.
It's super messed up.
Um,
Like,
moving on.
yeah, moving on from the one of the most from like a super unethical study.
If you want to check me out, I am Stuff by Bed everywhere and YouTube and Twitch and whatnot. If you want to chat to Matilda, then I guess go to twitter.com/Milda Games. And also, if you want to order the games, then go to MildaMatildaGames.wordpress.com. And
It's you do it through a Google form, and these days you might actually get a confirmation email for the thing, but you don't pay anything when you do it. You just sort of sign up interest, I guess, and then I will get back to you for payments when it's time for you, when I have the product ready. Just so no one is confused by the lack of like, oh, I haven't paid, I haven't had to pay anything yet. It's like, is that did I do everything right? Yeah, probably. So far, I have not received email from anyone or like questions from anyone who did it improperly.
awesome. And so it sounds like it's a system that is working well for you.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important thing to have a system. If you want to check out my future streams, tomorrow I'll be chatting about the LDEC contests. I will be announcing a winner for the art contest. We didn't manage to play through everything yesterday, so I don't think it's appropriate to pick top 5 for the game design contest. So we will be continuing that on the part 2 on some later week. And I will be chatting to Matilda again on Tuesday about the benefits and drawbacks of hand making games, and whether that's something that you might want to consider, whether that's something that I should consider, whether I should develop sewing or and so of course share, spread the word. Thank you everyone
Oh,
who's
I actually have one more thing. The results of the 2022 Consim Game Jam, which I participated in with the game about the Cold Wars in West Virginia in 1912. The results from that competition is going to be announced today, so that's something to keep eye on.
wow.
You know?
Well, all the best, and I hope I'll keep my fingers crossed for you.
Yeah, I'm a little bit nervous, or a lot nervous about like how the judges will like the game that I and a few others made.
Well, I guess it's always exciting to be awaiting that feedback, and I hope that however it turns out, you're able to feel proud of everything that you've achieved. because that's the important thing. I mean, everything is a step towards something else, and sometimes even when, yeah, I've been told off for saying this, but like none of my games I feel are, perfect encapsulations. Like everything, it has a lot of imperfections, and it's important to be aware of that. But you can be okay with something and appreciate despite all its flaws.
Yeah. I mean, I actually think Turncoats is perfect. I don't know what I have been thinking about what I could change with that game for a year, and I cannot think of anything. But that's the sort of pain of designing a very small game. You cannot, you can barely change anything within the rules. But we'll get to that on Tuesday.
So for now, lots of love to everyone, and bye, 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 bye. This is a goodbye song. Do do do. Bye, 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 bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye, 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 bye. This is the end of the show. Bye, 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 bye. And now it's time to go. Bye, 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 bye. This is a goodbye song. Bye, 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 bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye, 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 bye. This is the end of the show. Bye, 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 bye. And now it's time to go. Bye bye, everyone.